Thanks, Mary. Thanks to all of you for coming to this entrepreneurial lunch. Could I see a raise of hands? Who's this is your first time at our entrepreneurial lunch? Wow, that's awesome. Well, we're so glad you're here. We hope you enjoy lunch and the whole program that we have planned for today. So, I'm going to introduce Megan, who's sitting up here. Megan Hans is the owner and founder of Hammis Homestead and Consulting, where she provides mental health first aid training, customized workshops, and employee well being consulting across the country, which is over 20 years of experience that she has within this field. And she's passionate about normalizing mental health, how conversations at work. So today, Megan will start with a brief overview of and a presentation of mental health in the workplace, and then she will invite our wonderful panelists to come up and also share their experiences and insights as well. So, everyone, welcome Megan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And I am so happy that Lexi asked you to raise your hand if this is your first entrepreneurial lunch, because when I walked in today, I had a major flashback. I started my business 2 years ago after spending 20 years in a more corporate setting. And a friend invited me to an entrepreneurial lunch while I was still in my corporate job, but I hadn't yet started my business. And it felt like a coming out party for me because I was finally ready to say, "I'm starting my own business and it's really happening." And I just felt like I was among kindred spirits. And so now coming back here and getting to moderate is just an awesome full circle moment for me. So hope to see some of you that are here for the first time. You can clap. That makes me feel really good. So if you are sitting there like me dreaming of one day, maybe I can entrepreneur someday, I can tell you, you absolutely can. It's definitely possible. And also, before I get started, just a little bit of a background on burnout. I definitely have some lived experience with what I now can clearly identify as burnout, but it's almost funny and ironic in my role working in employee health and well-being. And one of the main things I went out and talked to work groups and departments about in my organization was burnout prevention, resilience, and kind of a lot of it was talking about self-care and, these things, this is like my whole life and background work, but I was starting to identify all the signs and symptoms in myself, but if you would have asked me if I was burned out, I would have absolutely said no. But now that I'm a few years removed from that burnout, I look back and I was like, "Dang, girlfriend was talking about burnout while she was so burned out." So it's funny, isn't it, how things are just, really ironic. So, one thing I do want everybody to know, good, I didn't have to do the Connor move to get it to, fast forward, is that burnout actually has a definition and is recognized by the World Health Organization and the ICD-11, which is how we diagnose and classify diseases, mental health disorders. ICD-11, it has a definition. And definitions are kind of boring, but what I think is cool about it is it helps us understand that burnout isn't just something in our head. Burnout is real. It happens. Um, and it's maybe not something that we get a specific diagnosis for, but we can oftentimes recognize it in ourselves and others. So I want to read this definition, and I don't feel like I'm in a position to take issue with the World Health Organization, but I do take issue with something in their definition that I really hate. And maybe you'll be able to pick out what it is that I really don't like about this definition, okay? Burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It's characterized by three dimensions: feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion, check, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and third, reduced professional efficacy. Burnout refers specific to phenomena in the occupational context, so in the work setting, and should not be used to describe other areas of one's life. So, does anybody think you know what the part of that definition is that I really don't like? Yeah, the management part. So it hasn't been successfully managed because, I'd be talking about this definition and it makes it feel like the bird's fault. Well, guess what? I'm doing the exercise, I'm doing the journaling, I'm getting professional help, I'm talking with a coach. It's not me. My system is burning me out. I've got a high workload, I've got unrealistic expectations. So I do not like that the World Health Organization that implies that it's just because we haven't successfully managed it. So that's just my little soapbox. Don't turn me in. Um, Question for the audience because I know there is I know some of you. I know there is a lot a wealth of knowledge. Our panelists have a lot, but I know you do too. What are some of the contributing factors to burnout that you've noticed either in yourselves or others? What are some of the top factors that contribute? Ooh, perfectionism. Absolutely. The inner desire or out pressure to appear or be perfect. Totally. People pleasing, kind of in the same line or the same vein, pleasing others before ourselves. Yes. Lack of delegating properly or, yeah, feeling like it's not always an option to decrease the workload for sure. Ooh, too many hands in the pot. I need some autonomy, maybe, to latitude to make some decisions. Too many opinions, and we need to move forward. Constant stress. Yeah, that's in the title of the panel too, is burnout, boundaries, and stress. Yeah, Sandy in the back, and then I'll get to you. Uninspiring work. Yeah, that kinda gave me goosebumps, like, uninspiring work, feeling not connected to a purpose or something greater, or I used to be jazzed and inspired, but I've changed, life's changed, and I'm not anymore. Totally.
Ờ, Sumeke sa di mao, bai asi ni ber ba gao, ma da da ah.
I'm still recovering from the constant need of being connected and needing to reply right away. I feel that every fiber of my being. Yeah, still recovering. So that's real. Yeah. Absolutely. We know that the supervisor relationship is one of the number one predictors of satisfaction at work. Absolutely. So work relationships. There's yes, you guys are awesome. Like external factors outside of work, life events, life changes. Yeah. Yeah. Any of us that are parents, I believe we have lived experience with this. I know I do. So yeah, we change, we evolve, we change. Yes to all of these. So, really hit the nail on the head. And research supports everything that you said as well, what people in the workplace are reporting. Um, I am a because of my background in academia, I do absolutely love to cite my sources and am constantly looking for new research. And so it's pretty cool that this American Psychological Association survey was done just earlier this year. And so it was 2,000 full time working adults. And the key impacts on the emotional well being at work. First and foremost theme was pervasive change. So 75% of respondents had described a change in their work as, quote, significant. And people were mostly positive about the change but reported it being a big stressor in their lives. But the people who were the least positive about the change were lower paid employees, people who felt like they had less input into the change. Other major stressors, the impact of preferred work environment. So, we all know, especially after COVID, that sometimes work locations changed. So, if people are working in a work setting that's not their preferred work environment, that creates a stressful rub. So, if I prefer to work amongst my peers, but we closed our office space down and went home, that creates a rub, for example. And then people are reporting less support. And I find this surprising because I'm a workplace mental health consultant and I actually work with places that I'm blown away at all they're doing for their employees in the mental health space. But I realize they're hiring me, so they're I'm working with kind of a select few, but people are reporting less psychological and mental health support at work, with especially blue collar laborers feeling left behind in the conversation. And workers with disabilities are reporting increase in loneliness, discrimination, and less accommodations for their jobs. And then, people are also reporting that management are usually much more on board with change, and that makes perfect sense because they often know about changes months and months before the rest of the employees do. So, with the rapid pace of change, it's often perceived very positively by, the bosses, with the employees kind of feeling really just left behind. It's kind of like this, whiplash of all of this change going on. And then while most people report positive impacts of AI and the role of technology, there are people where it creates a lot of fear and risk because they're worried about their jobs being replaced. So this is very recent. So these are some of the things, not necessarily focused on entrepreneurs, but in the workplace, generally speaking, that are stressful. And then a different report, but also from 2025, what I guess like, even though it's sad, um, I like that it really normalizes mental health challenges for people. So we don't talk about them enough, in my opinion. If you came here today, although we probably will get a lot of really great nuggets from the panelists, but if you came here today thinking, oh, they're going to make all my stress and anxiety go away, like far from it. But if we can talk about it, if we can just talk about it freely and we don't have to put up these fronts, that is one of the absolute number one things. So, why I put up that in this particular survey, 70% and above report burnout. That doesn't need to be diagnosed by a profession, depression and anxiety head. We shouldn't self diagnose those. A professional should diagnose this. But anyway, just kind of normalizes you're in the majority if you have a mental health condition in the workplace. You are in the majority. One way to measure burnout, if you're like I was and you're like, I don't think I'm burned out, but I know I was. There was the Maslow burnout inventory. You can Google it, you can find it online, but it'll show you a few examples of things that you'll find if you do the Maslow burnout inventory. Few examples. I feel I work too hard at my job. So you rate this on a Likert scale. You'll get a score at the end of the survey. Again, this is just a select few questions. Feel emotionally drained by my work. I feel tired when I get up in the morning and I have to face another day. And I'm afraid my job might be making me uncaring. So a lot of people, we read in the definition, cynicism is one of the things that characterizes burnouts. So how do we buffer about it? I put a little quote at the bottom that I heard somebody say, we're not going to be able to yoga and broccoli our way out of a bad situation. I mean, I do believe it can help, but it's, sometimes not laughable because if people can't get out of a bad cycle, whether that's depression or anxiety or burnout, there are very serious consequences that can happen, suicide being one of them. That's one of the things that I do in workplaces is I talk about suicide prevention training. So self-care is definitely tackling that very serious issue in a way more upstream approach. Self-care is definitely not selfish. Self-care doesn't need to cost a lot of money. I know when we scroll our Instagram accounts, we kind of feel overwhelmed that our self-care needs to cost a bunch of money. It does not. Some of the evidence-based, wellness or well-being things that I'm a huge proponent of are face-to-face social connection. Face-to-face in groups like this where we can feel each other's energy, where we can look at one another in the eye. They don't need to be big groups, they can be small groups, but the power of social connection is very real, as is getting outside in nature. So just observing nature, and we even know that for people in kind of a cubicle farm, even simulated nature can help. Even fake plants in an office can help, believe it or not. But the more we can get out in nature, seeking professional help, whether that's through a coach or a counselor or a therapist, very, very beneficial, and we should normalize that. Also, spirituality of some kind where you are able to fill your bucket, feel like we're part of a much greater purpose in this world. So, lots of us probably do lots of different things to tap into our spirituality, but there is a huge and growing evidence base for the need to connect. And then also, um, constant, and somebody mentioned it, just needing to be on email 24/7, that need to be connected 24/7. I think we all know this, but most programs on our phone are designed to keep us there and keep us going back, all the pings and dings. Our brain just can't handle that. So while we are evolving and humans are awesome and so adaptable, taking a toll on our mental health. So those are just kind of my, I guess, plugs for self-care, but also recognizing you can't self-care your way out all by yourself. So some of my favorite books kind of on this topic, and we can talk more afterwards about it. The Anxious Generation. So this is kind of what's happened since front-facing cell phones were introduced, like the iPhone in 2009. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Great if you're kind of looking to connect with power greater than yourself. Former Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, he is probably the foremost speaker, researcher on the power of social connections and the science behind that. He really talks about the workplace being a prime place for either helping your health or hurting your health. And then the good old Blue Zones Project. This is an oldie but a goodie. This is research on the places on Earth where people live to be 100 years or older at the highest rate. And it's kind of the things you would expect. They don't really lead glamorous lives. They do pretty simple things. They eat really clean foods. They move their bodies. They connect with their families. Like, not glamorous, but dang, it's doing something good for them. So I love, love, love the Blue Zones. Okay, enough from Megan. I'm going to ask the panelists to come up and then I will read their intros or their bios. All right. Okay, so Jacob Frederick is the owner of Intentionally Selfish, and he's spent over 12 years in the health and wellness space as a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, well-being specialist, and a team leader. Jacob founded Intentionally Selfish, and that's a health coaching business focused on helping people build sustainable habits that prioritize self-care and long-term well-being. Jacob also serves as a coach and trainer for Be at the Re Center. Passionate about redefining what it means to live well, Jacob empowers others to take care of themselves first. Amen to that. Rethink the wellness journey and find more joy in everyday life. So, welcome, Jacob. Next, we have Kim. Yeah, welcome. And next we have Kim. Kim works for Elise Glennon Consulting. And Kim's a collaborative community leader and a nonprofit consultant. I'm currently working at Elise Glennon, and she partners with mission organizations to elevate their impact. Previously, you worked here, right? President and CEO of the Iowa City Area Business Partnership, formerly the Chamber of Commerce, championing regional economic development and spearheading initiatives like the Better Together 2030 plan. She holds a BA in Management and Psychology from Bucknell University and a master's in education and higher ed administration from Northwestern, and is passionate about leadership, trust building, and community focused change. Welcome, Kim. So glad you're It really is a great panel. And then we have Roxanne Erdahl, and Roxanne is a team and leadership coach for her own company, Erdahl Coaching and Development. Roxanne's a longtime entrepreneur, certified coach, and facilitator committed to helping individuals and teams lead with clarity, courage, and compassion. Roxanne owned and operated a successful retail business in downtown Iowa City for 25 years. It's really cool. You can ask her about it afterwards. before founding her coaching business, where she now supports business owners, nonprofit leaders, and teams through often overlooked emotional terrain of leadership. A professional certified coach and a daring way facilitate. That's one of Brene Brown's facilitation workshops. I would love to do that someday. Roxanne has brought the research of Brene Brown into real world practice since 2013, helping people navigate burnout, fear, and self doubt while building lives and organizations that matter. Roxanne's known for her warmth, humor, and ability to hold space for honest conversations that lead to real transformation. Welcome. Okay. I'm so ready to get into the questions that we've prepared for our panelists because they do have such diverse backgrounds. I won't dictate who goes first, okay? So y'all can just pass your microphone um and so my goal is to ask questions, but then be thinking about what questions you may have because your questions are just as important. Okay, so first question for our panelists is how do you all recognize when you're burning out? And you can give either a past or a present example, but how does it show up in your own self?
Okay, I can go first. Hmm, I'm thinking, I mean, you thought, I'm glad my kids aren't here because they would probably say something totally different than what I'm going to say right now. Um, so the type of coaching that I was originally trained in back into 2007 was what they call ontological coaching. So I'll say that, I'll talk about that, which is body, emotion, language. Those are the three areas that we show up. So when I think about burnout for myself, um, I will say, and I'll say this going into because you're also gonna hear that I'm heading into what I call the 4th quarter of my career. Um, so when I look back, when I had my store downtown, which I did, I was much more reactive, burned out much quicker. Over the years, I think my body's basically said, "Okay, it tells me first." Usually there's a crink in my neck. I just the chiropractor the other day, same creak in my neck. Um, so progress, not perfection. But so I think but the body for me tells me first. The emotional part, usually I get curt, short, which is I think not like me. Again, my kids would tell you different. Um, and I think as far as the language, um, I think again it goes back to I find myself getting kind of clipped and really not listening. I become, even with my training, what I find is that I listen to respond rather than listen to hear, and that's when I'm in burnout, so
Right now. Gosh, for me, well, I guess I'll share my thoughts via kind of the story of my own experience. And so, as Megan mentioned, I used to run the Chamber of Commerce here. And so, this is also a full circle moment for me coming back here and seeing so many familiar places and faces, and also being in a place that where I did get burned out. And so, for me, so this was back in 2022, and, it's post-COVID. I think COVID had a lot of impacts, but, my job, just exponentially increased, and it just never stopped, after that, and so it was I guess it was right after New Year's, and I had tried I started a meditation practice. It was, New Year's 2023, and I I just did, like, the Calm.com app, and it was like a New Year's meditation, and it had you visualize, like, going up in a hot air balloon and flying, and I felt so stuck. I felt so stuck, and I had this visual of actually being buried alive, like that I was just u underground, and, like, I couldn't breathe, and, like, it was just so, you know, powerful, and, I wound up sharing it, like, finally, like, with my
my husband, who was like, "Oh my god," like, and I shared these symptoms I've been having, like, well, I'm gonna say this. He told me, "Don't say this on the panel," but, like, I had diarrhea for, like, a year. It's like my digestive system, and I thought it was normal, like, it's so, like, I shared that and just, like, my throat was, like, just always, like, closed, like, I couldn't and he's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, we need to get you to the doctor," and then I came in to work, and I wound up, sharing, this visual I had, with my colleagues, and they're like, "What do you mean you're buried underground?" They're like, "You need to," they kinda rushed around me, and they, were like, "You have to," they put me on what I called forced PTO because I was very squirrely about it, but, like, I just I was very lucky, to have the colleagues and the team that I had that were like, "Nope, we can't pull you out of that hole. You're gonna have to dig yourself up, but we see your white flag, and, you need to get out of here, and you just need to sit in it." So they made me sit in those symptoms and that discomfort, like, sit in silence and rest, and that's when I realized, like, all these different things, like what you said, like, the body I mean, my body was certainly telling me, and then the emotional part, the cynicism, I was very negative. I was trying to control everything. My team, some of them prior who were in here can attest to that. Like I was just trying to really, control everything and the language. Like and I had friends, a friend who's in this room who called me on, like I said something like I'm just gonna drive off a bridge or like something like that. That was like, whoa, wait. Like so you just start seeing these and even things like sleeping. I was sleeping in like a fetal position, all the time, and just like the anger, like the resentment, like that comes out, and it would come out and like driving, and found myself yelling at people for like so like you just start and you see it retrospectively, and so being able to just sit in that, and I've seen it like I've experienced it at different points, my life and career, but really getting to kinda sit with that and, figure that out, was telling. So that was my wake-up call. That
Yeah, I before you go, Jacob, I just want to acknowledge with Kim how courageous it is to share with your work group and your husband. Well, no, this is a safe space. I think we're amongst friends, and that's real talk. I think we did kind of tagline that's real talk. Um, it is really powerful to have such good colleagues that you are comfortable sharing that with. And, I feel like that truly can save people's lives sometimes because what happens if people don't have that outlet is they do something like you mentioned with, driving the car, auto side, something. So that's really cool. That's cool that you were able to self-aware enough to recognize it when you were in it, which not all of us are. You recognized it when you were in it, but you were brave enough to share with colleagues. So kudos to you and your colleagues. So, all right. Okay, Jacob, next up.
Okay, so for me in the past, I feel like the harsh truth is I didn't recognize burnout and I continued to get to a worse place. And it was a big challenge in my life that kind of made me look back and say, like, wow, I really was going through that for a long time. I can specifically remember, like, really struggling as a personal trainer and group exercise coach, like, to get my own workouts in, and I was like, "Well, if I just go to Planet Fitness at 3 a.m. and then work all day, like, I'll be fine," right? And that was my mindset at the time, and I did it for a little bit, and then that stops working. You're like, "What am I doing wrong?" And so for me, like, looking back and even just as Kim mentioned, like, laying in the fetal position, I was like, "Oh, that was definitely me during that time too." Like, I remember going to bed facing away from my partner in the fetal position, and so, like, looking back, I think I'm still learning from, those years and what kind of got me there. And then thinking more about the present day, I think one of the things that I'm most proud of being up here is like, I don't have it figured out. I still experience burnout. I still go through hard challenges and am still learning. I'm a big sports fan, so I'll quote Kobe Bryant here, and is like the end result is, doesn't really matter. It's the constantly learning, it's the constantly figuring it out, being curious that matters. So I think what helps me in the present day is continuing to reflect and continuing to plan. And I always mention with my clients, like, I don't expect people to set goals or to plan for perfection, but instead for improvement. So every week that we do set a plan or set goals, like what are we taking away from that as far as a learning tool? And for me, personally right now in my life, my fiance and I try to, and we don't do it all the time, find one night that we can reflect back on the week and find proud moments, find things that were exciting, find life memories, and kind of talk about those a little bit. And when I struggle to do that, I realize that I'm getting to that point of burnout a little bit, and I need to start doing more things for myself. But I also think when I start to do more stuff for myself, I notice those little things in the day that we don't always catch. And the things that are really, really memorable and really great in our life that we often overlook because we are, maybe not doing enough for ourselves. Um, so kind of that constant planning and reflection is how I kind of find out. But I also the one other thing I'll say is for me is production. And if I just continue to say is like, "Oh, I'll have time," because I think as entrepreneurs, we can always be working, and that's one of the biggest challenge, and setting those boundaries. But for me, it's like I noticed my to-do list was not that long, and I just like went 2 hours with not doing anything. So like my production really slips is another one too.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob, for bringing up production. That was a talking point I failed to hit in my slides. 69% of people crave freedom and flexibility. And so that's one of the upsides of entrepreneurship. But the downsides, as Jacob mentioned, is also this pressure to produce and perform and ultimately bring in income to survive. And so that's a real stressor. And then also very coach-like of you to have that reflection time with your partner. I need to bring that back. So I knew I would get lots of nuggets today. Okay, so next question. I didn't talk a lot about boundaries. I mostly focused just on burnout and what it is, but we know boundaries can be so helpful in terms of burnout prevention. So, does anybody have any examples of boundaries that you've set in your life and career to protect your overall well being? So, some really easy examples I have, or I do, is like no meetings after 4 p.m. and no working on Sundays. I mean, I'm like, own my own business. I'm an entrepreneur. I sure should be able to like set these. And I don't do meetings on Saturdays either. Nobody requests that. But those are some really easy boundaries. So, does anybody have any examples of boundaries that you've kind of set in your personal or professional life that have helped with burnout prevention?
I was really nervous sitting next to Megan that I would have to go first, and I was blessed that I didn't, but I guess maybe we'll go snake draft now and I'll do this one first. So, um, for me, yeah, I heard, I can't remember who it was at the time, but, mentioned that someone that was very successful for a long time, like Tuesdays was his day at 4 p.m. He shut everything off, no questions, non-negotiable. That was time for him and his partner. And he talked about how that was very, very beneficial. Now I've tried that and it's hard because the world we live in, I feel like there's just so many different things always going on, and like a commitment will come up, and it's like, wow, that would really be beneficial to go to, and it might not even be something that's work related too. So I really try hard to have one night that is that way, and then adjust that. Now, obviously, the challenge with that is making sure that you have that kind of plan ahead of time because life is crazy. So for me, it's having that boundary of one night where I can shut off, and then I do work in a field where a lot of times you do work on Saturdays or Sundays or nights or mornings. So I try to, for the most part, stay away from Saturdays as well. Sunday, I like to do a lot of like prep work for clients and things like that. So Saturdays is a day that I like to do too. And then the final thing that I'll say is making sure that I can look back and check enough boxes for me. And I don't necessarily think that needs to be like anything substantial. It could be making sure I have time to, I love to walk my daughter before we go to daycare. Those little things that help kind of impact my overall success in the day. It could be just making sure I do my gratitude practice each day. It could be making sure that I get my workout in. Or I'm the weird person that really likes to go grocery shopping. So like make sure I have what I need for the week and get to the grocery store. So I would say those are some of the things that I try.
Yeah, I definitely relate to those. I think for me, so when I left the chamber, I took a year off, which I'm very grateful that I was able to do, and I did a lot of internal, deep work, and I'm now kind of back in the working world, and but I wanted to kind of go in and intentionally, and I spent a lot of time trying to rewire some behaviors, and so I'm lucky in that I'm working with someone who also believes in balance and is, struggled with that herself and that, I've started, working just part-time, 20 hours a week. So I feel lucky in that I have that flexibility and that I could say to her, like, listen, I don't want to do calls before 10 a.m. because I'm really not a morning person and I just don't want to do it anymore. And so like putting that into place. I like having mornings to myself to be able to just do my meditation, my yoga, journal, all of that. That's when I'm most successful. And so I'm grateful that I have that, to externally. But really, I think the hardest boundary setting part is like with myself, like with, your your own internal space. And so, working through that, one of my biggest ahas that first kind of few months when I had that time off was realizing, my husband and I had gone back to New York where I'm from. And, we had this time in this open space. I was like, all right, who are we gonna visit? Like who are we gonna visit and which states, how many people we're gonna cover? Like, and like all of a sudden the calendar was full and he looked at me, he's like, I think you have an issue with open space. And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, the calendar and, like, also the cupboards, everything's, like, full, like, cram it all in, cram it all in." And, like, that was a huge aha for me that I was like, "Okay, it's maybe wasn't totally the work environment, it's me. It's just it's how I operate and how I look to maximize, everything." And so that was a huge aha, and I have to work on it, like, every day to not do that, to, like, be okay with blank space and rest and open to so, like, it's setting that boundary with yourself, constantly, like, and that's been, to me, the biggest challenge, and I still haven't quite figured it out, but I'm a lot more aware of, like, when I'm going into that, I look at my calendar when I'm not getting enough rest, and so, yeah. Um, I love even in my day I'm learning so many things. I'm like, "Tick, tick." Okay. Um, I hate boundaries. I absolutely struggled with boundaries for years because I'm the type of person that I will offer before there's a request. I mean, I just, and owning my own store, when you have a store that's open 24, I mean, feels like 24/7, but it's open every day of the week, um, it is 24/7. And so how when someone calls you up and says, "I'm sick, I can't work," and you're like, "Okay," so you have to go in. Move into leadership, same thing. When you're leading teams and something happens, you can't say, "Well, I was taking the day off." No, you have to show up and come in. So it was really tough for me, in this whole arena of boundaries. The one thing that I heard that helped me was when someone said, "Well, you can do permeable boundaries." And I'm like, "Oh, tell me more." Because for there, it was like, I can't do that, but I can do this. And when I heard that, that was something I could adapt to. And so I used that. The other thing I would share with you is that boundaries takes courage. I think that both in my personal life and my professional life, I have learned that setting boundaries and the ability to say no, that won't work for me, um, does not come easy for me. And so I've had to really dig deep and sometimes say, "Mm, can I get back to you tomorrow on that?" And that's okay to do that. I mean, so I think that those are the things that I have found for me that has really helped me. But and we don't I think that rigid boundaries and let me talk about also the 24/7 because we are in a world we're going to talk the question was how things changed and as Mary and I said we go back. I mean, I can share with people that Mary is actually my press citizen route back in a long time ago. Thank you. There you go. So, yes. Yes. So I did have a store. Full disclosure, I started out in Iowa City 74, hippie leather worker, proud of it. Then had a store on the Ped Mall till 97, which I call a hippie hallmark store. Um, I own my hippiness, so just so you know, I tell my grandkids that. Um, so anyway, back to boundaries. I think that it's really something that we don't talk about enough in the workplace. And I think that it's okay to say to someone, I'm choosing, and again, going back to body, emotion, language, I am choosing not to talk to you about this right now. It's okay to say that. And we need to be able to talk to the people that we work with. Um, the teams for 9 years of my career after I shut my store down, I worked at Gazette Communications overseeing teams. And we did something which we called rules of the road. And I think it's really important in any organization, any store, any business, that you really have these kind of conversations that we're having here today among your staff because it will come up. And you want to be able to have it come up in a constructive way, not when somebody loses it and then you're in crisis. So that's kind of my feeling about boundaries.
Thank you, all 3 of you. I mean, those were excellent examples, so thank you, and the way I learned permeable boundaries, which I love, is a nut sandwich. So you, like, soften the no, with kind of I can do this, but the answer to what you requested is no, and then soften it at the end, but I love permeable boundaries, so good. Okay, so next question is when I started working in the corporate health and wellness field in the early 2000s, we were talking about burnout and stress at work. We are still talking about burnout and stress at work. Still talking about it, still a topic. We maybe have more data now and we have a definition now. It is still pervasive. And so help me understand what's changed and what has remained the same and why is this still a very relevant and must be an interesting topic? I assume some people came for the topic and not just for lunch. But we're still talking about it. We're still here. So help us all understand that.
Sorry about it. How do you want me to talk? Okay. Um, yeah, this gave me a lot of space because I will a few years, few decades to be able to look back on how things have changed. In some ways, they haven't changed at all. Again, and when I said earlier, if you own your own business or in leadership, it's really a 24/7 type thing. Where it has changed, and I actually had this realization recently when I moved back. So, most of my corporate and my coaching career has been up in Cedar Rapids. I moved back a year and a half ago. I am an Iowa City girl, City High. So, about a year and a half ago, it's like Rex get to rear end back to Iowa City. Um, and I'm really happy to be here. But the last 2 years, I've been helping someone start a business in North Liberty. And starting a business now, owning a business now is incredibly different than owning a business 40 years ago. Um, I've also gone in and helped other businesses as part of what I've brought in to do is do corporate training, team training because of my background. But owning a business and the different ways that we communicate, people are talking about email. And I said something to Meg about you've got you've got now 4 generations in the workplace. So you can have people that want to write something out, to only text something, only email, only do Slack, only do Zoom, only do Team. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's stressful because you don't know because everyone's communicating differently. So 40 years ago there was only one way, to communicate. And so even though it was simpler and we've made things, at least for me, by making things what we believe is simpler, faster, in some ways it's become more complicated, which I think is more stressful. And we're not talking about it. And I think especially the older generations, there is something that I've done in the past, which is I've gone into companies and done something called generations in the workplace because we do. And I think that um, it takes an understanding. Uh, Brene Brown was mentioned, and so yeah, I was certified and have worked with Brene Brown since 2013, and she's the one who really brought up the whole idea of vulnerability and courage and shame. There is a lot of shame in the workplace when someone brings something up and you're like, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Somebody brought up some new, I don't think it, I mean, it was something, and I'm like, Okay. I mean, I've had to really be humble and just say, "I don't have a clue what you're talking about." I really have. And I think that people are afraid to do that. They're afraid to say, "I really don't know that." So I think that as far as for me, the way that things are changed, um, there's a lot more out there. There's a lot more for us to be able to talk about how do we deal with burnout. I think that, but I loved what you said about yoga and broccoli are not gonna cut it. Um, there's 3 people that I will share that I've really worked with throughout my, career the last 20 years, which obviously one is Brené Brown. The other one is a woman named Susan David who wrote Emotional, Agility. But there's a third that I worked with, a woman named Kristen Neff, who really talked about self-compassion, and I would really encourage you to look at her work because that ultimately, to me, with everything that we're talking about today, comes back to your ability to show self-compassion, to check in with yourself. The other thing, 'cause and I wanna share one other thing. Most of the work that I've done in the corporate arena, I would agree with what Megan said, which is really important, and I wanna reiterate what she talked about, which is very often what happens is things like this are brought into companies, and upper management is given these wonderful workshops, they're giving us this new way of learning, but then what happens with it? So, I would really encourage you that if you something bubbles up for you today, that there's some nugget that you can take from this, go home and share it. Share it with your family members, share it with your team members, because that's the only way that we're really gonna be able to, I think, make a difference is to, have these important conversations. So
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I think, what has changed, over time, certainly like the internet, the advent of the internet, I mean, just blew everything open, like no boundaries, working 24/7, the speed of things, like, all of that. Hence our needing to have conversations around boundaries. But I think, what hasn't changed, I think to your point, Roxanne, is like us. Again, it comes back to you, us, the individual, like, and how we're wired as humans, part of it's human nature, but also society, and, societal pressures and how you mold to that. I mean, I grew up in, the 80s, 90s, and it was like work hard, play hard. Like that's how you were trained. No pain, no gain. And I remember like as a woman, like being encouraged, like, "Oh, you need to get out there and have a career and find yourself before you settle down." And so, so I didn't get married until I was 40 and I don't have kids because I was trying to find myself in a career, in a job, like, and now looking back at that, like, eh, and the time I've spent the past couple years, like, no, I'm like reconnecting with myself, like finding myself, like it's not external. And I think that that's what hasn't changed. And I think, I mean, I appreciate employers who are making an effort, and you because we spend so much time in the workplace. So I really, I think that's great, but I don't think they could do it alone. Like I think a lot of it is just on us as individuals and doing the really deep, work that you need to do to, reconnect with yourself, to reconnect with your body, to understand, like, going back and understanding some of the pressures and the trauma and everything that's impacted and shaped you and shaped those behaviors that are then leading to burnout. And I think until you address that root cause, you're gonna continue to repeat the same patterns and behaviors over and over again. And so I think that that's I mean, while, yeah, we can try and change society, there's actually a book, that I read that's called The End of Burnout by Jonathan Malazek, and he references a very similar definition. And in that, he's like, you could change the environment, that you're in, or try and change it, whether it be work or society at large. You can leave the environment, altogether. You could change yourself. And sometimes it's a little bit of a combination of those things. But I think until you change yourself and how you operate in those things that are leading to burnout, we're going to continue to have these conversations.
Man, I almost think going last is the worst. I have all these ideas in my head. They've said so many amazing things, but I think our modern world is asking a lot more from our well-being. And when we look at what's changed, our ancestors made about 2,500 decisions a day. We make like 25,000. We've already talked about having to constantly respond to emails. We already kind of talked about the demands that we have in our day-to-day life. Time wasting to time saving technology. You think like a dishwasher or, washing machine, things that save us time. There's been just as many things that are in our life now that are time wasting as well. When you think about social media, when you think about, Netflix or streaming devices, and again, all of the other things that kind of distract us from our time away from work as well. I think what hasn't changed is the ability to prioritize ourselves and really focus on ourselves first. And it's kind of this backwards approach I think we have when life gets crazy that we have to go do everything for everyone else. But if you stop for a second and think about when things are crazy, when things are higher stress, who you are when you're taking care of yourself first and who you are when you're not taking care of yourself first, I think you'll realize that you're far more successful in those moments. You're a far better person to your loved ones and your coworkers, and we're getting a lot more done. And the challenges of that is, again, all the things that are we face in a day-to-day basis of, we probably check our phone before maybe we even talk to somebody. We're on our phone, maybe responding to emails before we do anything for ourselves. Like I was on a presentation one time and I asked how many people are actively watch like Netflix or any streaming device and also scroll through their phone. And I'm sure we've all done it. And so it just kinda goes back to we're almost always distracted. And so I like to really try and elevate little things or make little experiences. So I resort back to like, I remember when my parents would watch the show Survivor, which somehow by a miracle is still around and a TV show. I think, right? Yeah, it's still a show. But it was like a huge event. They would get like a special dinner and like we would watch it with them. And it was watching TV, right? So something that can be really beneficial, but you were locked in. And I think that's why I like sports so much is because like you're talking about it the next day with somebody. It's happening there live and in the moment. So what can we do in our day-to-day life to elevate experiences where, hey, maybe I'm watching a show that I'm going to watch 3 episodes of, but I'm going to make like popcorn and have my favorite LaCroix, or I'm going to watch it and then talk about it with a friend afterwards. It sounds silly, but it takes us away from being in those moments where we're scrolling on our phone and watching Netflix, and just done nothing in the past half an hour except for we don't even know what we saw on Instagram. So I think to kind of put it in short, what has changed is I think being here. I don't know for sure, but I think 30, 40 years ago, this conversation wasn't being had. We weren't meeting here to talk about these things and looking for ways to better ourselves, and start to think about like how do I improve my burnout strategies and try and be more reflective to what that looks like. So I think finding ways that we can continue to elevate things that are beneficial for us. And the final thing I'll say with that is remaining curious to what that looks like as a coach. We try and put ourselves in a box. I'm going to speak from like the personal training nutrition side of things is like, oh, I saw somebody do this diet and this workout. So that's what's going to help me be successful. The truth is every person in this room has a vastly different schedule. I mean, we could go on and on for what's different about every person in this room. So, continuously being curious. And then the final piece to that is like life changes. What works for you 3 years ago probably isn't working today. So that's where I like that planning and reflection consistently because what brings me the most happiness when my parents in town is not leaving them to go do a workout, spending time with them. So what is coming up in each one of our days that is important? Maybe it's a work meeting that we don't get to have a lot and I want to elevate that a little bit more. So finding things within your day that are those little pieces that we can elevate and know what's coming with that planning reflection.
Mic drop from Coach Jacob Frederick right there. Yeah, all said. We have time for an audience question or two, and I guess my request is I kind of soak in, like you are, probably everything we heard. Look at someone in the eyes when you ask them a question and really try to model the behavior that you want others to see in you. So, I find myself all the time complimenting, a hairdo or how somebody looks or somebody's shoes. And it's like, Megan, that's not about them. Like, be curious about them, like what's behind those eyeballs. So, thank you so much, panelists. Like, really cool to sit and listen and soak it all in. So, welcome. Are we pet friendly here? Question? We have a question from the dog. Yeah, any comments or questions from the audience and I can roam. Yeah.
I add this disclaimer, this is not but one thing that I've seen a huge backlash of is that self-care is comes from a home of privilege, that not a lot of people have the capacity who are working 3 jobs, taking care of kids, taking care of aging parents, taking care of kids with special needs, all these things. They do not have the capacity to sit and, like, take a yoga class. They may not have the money. They may not have the bandwidth. What would be and your advice, since you're in this realm too, what would be your advice on how to address those things?
Okay, so great question. And I can tell you, I was told not to talk about self care during the pandemic for the very reason you mentioned. Because try talking about self care to a nurse who is denied vacation, who is actually denied the ability to go home. Try talking about self care to her, punch you right in the face or right through that Zoom screen. So I hear you. And at the same time, I am confident saying self-care is for everybody. I'm over saying self-care isn't for everybody. Using the example you used, busy single mom, working 3 jobs, all the things, you can be, and I'm not saying what is right self-care for people or not. You can be alone on the bus putting your earphones in, doing your meditation, doing your self care, saying your prayer at night before you go to bed. It can be free. In my opinion, is that it actually should be free. It is certainly a place of privilege to be able to hire people and do things that cost money. Jacob brought up our ancestors. They didn't have access to these things. So, and that's why I like to say you can't yoga and broccoli your way out of it. Self care isn't what we see on Instagram. Self care is doing things for our heart. And if that's while I'm doing the dishes, I'm looking out that little sliver of a window where I can see my bird feeder, that can be self care. And privilege is me standing up here being able to talk about this and us being able to gather right now where some people don't have the option, right? Like, I sure would like to go to that entrepreneurial lunch. I'll be dang if I can get downtown or leave my job, right? Um, Self-care should absolutely be free, does not need to take more than a glimmer, more than a moment. It can, and that's awesome, but it does not have to. So that's my kind of opinion on that. Definitely hear you. And at the same time, taking care of oneself is for everybody. It's essential. A mom knows that. A mom knows she can't care for her kids unless she is taking care of herself first. So, other thoughts or other opinions? Mine's sometimes unpopular, I know.
The only other thing I would say, which I think is really a great question, is self-care is different for every single one of us. So I go back to it's so important that we check in with ourselves. I think you could ask individuals like what's self-care to you, and they may not be able to tell you because they haven't really thought about it. So I think and I think that there's a couple things that one of the things that Brene she has these things called Romo starters, but I love the idea of, when someone does start talking about it, instead of talking about yourself, say, "Tell me more." Like, tell me more, like, what's important to you? Again, talk to your kid, "What's important to you?" And tell me more. I think that helps, but that's a great question. I think
Yeah.
it's really important.
And sometimes it's surviving. Like we're in survival mode, not thrive mode, like survive, not thrive. And those are just sometimes stages of life is I need to do self-care to survive. And sometimes it's to thrive. So good. Question in the back. I'll bring the mic to you so we can hear.
Um, Actually, I had two questions. My first question was, can burnout look different among men and women? And if so, what should we look for in the opposite gender to help? Whether that be like a coworker or, an employee. And my second question is, how can you ensure boundaries are met when you have lower seniority in a company?
Okay, those are great questions. The first one, can burnout look different between men and women? Does I I can't speak to the difference in burnout to stick up. There is much more help seeking behavior and willingness to talk amongst women and seek out professional care and support like counseling. Amongst men, there is much more stigma to be strong and to provide, and we don't talk about that. Um, as for does burnout look different? I don't know. I think it looks, but maybe our panelists have some.
Um, I could guess what I would share from like a women's perspective, because it's been something that I've kind of been researching, reading about lately. Like for me, when I was going through burnout, I was also going through perimenopause, and so I feel like that definitely, again, like in the internal stuff, internal hormones. I mean, for sure, played a role, whether it was lack of sleep or other things that it causes. So I sense that is a contributing factor along with, Megan, what you said, like, human giver syndrome, for women, and we are more apt to ask for help. Yeah, from the male side of it, I think I just found out yesterday that a former colleague in the chamber space had committed suicide, a male, and I'm stunned. I'm still stunned because he was so, successful and kind, and I go like, you just never I never would have known, and I'm really struggling with what happened, like, just n not you know, don't suffer in silence, I guess is what I would say, and I think that I could see that, more maybe in men. And I don't know, not to put you on the spot, Jacob, but
She is putting me on the spot, she said. So I was thinking as she was talking, like if this room was full of just men, I think it would be harder for me to be vulnerable than having a mixed and or full of just women. And I think even to my one-on-one experiences with like men to women, personally, I almost find it harder to do coaching with just men, which almost sounds backwards. And I think it is that like even though I know all of the things and coach and train on some of them, like vulnerability still has that little bit of sign of weakness, I think, for men more than women. And I think it looks burnout does look different for men and women, but I think it looks different for everybody. I don't think that's just a gender thing too. Um, and then I think the second question was something along the lines of boundaries with different generational managers or something
Or,
like that.
seniority within an organization, and so based on your seniority, might it be harder to set boundaries if you are not senior?
Yeah, and I think that's a challenging question depending on who the manager is. For me, I always like to tell people that I manage like I want to be here to support you as a person, so just be transparent and open with me. Um, and then I think one thing that comes to mind, and this might be a little bit of a backwards answer to it, is I people are staff that I've had are always nervous when they come up and tell me that they're moving on to a different opportunity. And I always let them know like if you're working for somebody that doesn't understand you're going on to a better opportunity and is not excited for you, it's probably someone you don't want to work for anyways. And I know that can be challenging at times, but if you can go to your higher up manager, boss, whatever, and kind of share like this is my boundary and this is my why behind it. And I think sometimes explaining the why behind things is beneficial as well. It's easy to be reactive to like, well, this person's never worked on Friday. But then when you're like, well, I'm taking my mom to, her doctor's appointment, whatever it is, like I think just being more transparent in the why can be beneficial too.
One thing we know about generations in the workforce is that younger workers are more willing to put boundaries in place. So you can assume that younger workers are maybe less senior, is that younger workers are kind of standing up for what they know that they need. That's, of course, not everybody, but I think that's one of the things that the workforce is learning about the younger generation is they're less willing to tolerate the pings at night and the encroaching on the weekends, and they're more likely to use their vacation and kind of optimize it and maximize it, which I just cheer on and applaud because I'm a little jealous. I know I certainly wasn't that way. So we're at time. So I'm going to pass the mic to Mary so she can close.
All right. Well, thank you to our panel, and to Megan. Before we wrap up here, I want to give Shannon from JPEG the mic and let her share some of the things that are going on at JPEG and things that are coming up.
Thank you so much for being here. I love to do hands discussions. Sometimes, that was that, but I bring it all. But I thought these questions were really different, really great. Even the burnouts, but just sharing it. I really loved it. Um, Thank you all for being here today. Just want to give a plug for connecting, and I'm someone that I really love the in-person talk. And the one that would buy the emails. They drive me crazy. I plus a little bit over. Like I only want text for talk cheap. So yeah, very different, not like communication stuff. So in continuing that next day series, I want to talk about JCAC and if you're interested in starting on side hustle, we have a program doing a digital thing it so all of your phones can hear me so that I've been listening and I'm doing together. Uh JCAC for instance digital we get applications that now for that response starts in October. So yeah, it's an area or a place to go and see if you have this idea and you want to see if it's worth pursuing. This is where you want to go. There's connections there as you made coaching. A lot of people know already about the school here. There are great coaches actually in this space here. Alex and Jay and uh, you know, if you go towards the back, actually, you'll start to find them there. If you want to connect with anybody, I do know some people here already are entrepreneurs and have startups, so feel free just to actually invite the names. I'd be able to help you. And then you that area of just getting out there, asking into us. But yeah, just wanted to say thank you for being here. Talk about that. There's lots of things happening. JPEG at University is all week here. Can you feel free to find any of us and email over there? We've got lots of free interns that will fit you in the right place. We will be around the ground to get us further in there for you. So, yes, thank you.
Again, thank you, and everybody have a great afternoon and great weekend, and we'll see you in November, first Friday.